Hello and welcome to Queen of Shadows Part 2. Today we're going to be going over chapters 13 through 25. And of course, spoilers for everything that's happened up till this moment in the series, but nothing that happens after chapter 25 is going to be discussed today. But we're just going to kick right off with chapter 13, which starts in Aylin's POV. She is back at the Assassin's Keep for the first time in 2 years. So she has not been here since Assassin's Blade. Also, just for the sake of your mental timeline, the rescue for Aedion is tomorrow. So she goes straight to Arobyn's office to kind of talk game plans for rescuing Aedion. And the only thing different about the entire Assassin's Keep is that Arobyn had a new rug, and apparently he couldn't wash Aylin's blood out of it from the time he beat her to a bloody pulp, so he replaced it. Before they start talking game plans, he asks her, is she doing this as Aylin or Selena? Which honestly, it kind of sounds like a dumb question, but he's basically asking if she's going to reveal to Aedion who she is, which in my opinion, I definitely didn't get that from this, but Aylin and Arobyn have a whole secret language that we don't know. So Aylin knows that that's basically what he's asking, but she already knows that she's going to tell Aedion the truth of what she's been up to and what she's been doing for all these years. And this is kind of the moment where she decides that Arobyn's not going to kind of hold her secret over her head anymore, and she does kind of find a lot of relief in that. But then Arobyn asks where his Valg-possessed soldier was, and she's like, dude, I'm trying to already, there's a trap set for me, this is a trap, and I'm knowingly going into a trap, and I'm still trying to get in and out with my cousin without being captured. The last thing I need to do right now is go under an even higher profile by causing chaos by kidnapping a Valg guard. So you'll get him after Aedion is rescued. This is also kind of her way to ensure that she's actually going to get in and out with Aedion with Arobyn's help. If he really wants this Valg soldier, he's going to help her. He then threatens to have her hunt down if she doesn't end up going through with her end of the bargain, but honestly, she didn't expect anything less. She says, don't worry, you'll get your Valg soldier, but not until Aedion is rescued. Then he goes on to ask her if she plans to kill Dorian, which is honestly crazy that he would even ask, but Aylin doesn't answer. She refuses to answer. So that should make you a little nervous. Anyways, so they go over the plan, but that's not really important. What is important is that later that night, Lysandra is in Aylin's apartment with her planning. Planning what, you may ask? We'll get there in a little bit. As they're doing their little planning date, if you will, she's like, are you aware that there's a man spying on you from the neighboring building's rooftop? And not only does Aylin know, but she also knows who it is, and it's Kale. She's like, I kind of expected Kale to be keeping a close eye on me, if you will. Lysandra then just starts asking questions in the middle of their planning, why is she back, and why does she want to rescue Aedion of all people? Now, I will remind you, Lysandra does not know that this is Aylin. She thinks this is Selena, so she's not aware at all that she's currently talking to the Queen of Terrasen. So to her, she's like, why in the world would you want to rescue Aedion, the King of the North? And then why is it a trap for you? Why are we going through this huge plan? Why is this a trap? She's very clueless, but she's still helping. She's still helping. She's very willing to help, but she's got a lot of questions. Aylin kind of answers her questions with another question being why do you want to help me? I guess that's the real question here. And Lysandra says not only does she want to help Selena do this, but she's hoping that she will help her take down Arobyn. She also reveals that she has almost killed Arobyn multiple times. She has just been waiting for the right moment. Lysandra's taking this very seriously. I mean, Arobyn did kill the love of her life, so it does make sense to an extent, but this is kind of unexpected coming from Lysandra. Basically says that she thinks that Selena coming back in town is a sign that now is actually the right time. This is the moment where Selena and Lysandra decide that, they're not all too different, and they come to a truce and they decide that they're going to be teammates and work together, which they were already kind of working together, but it was just kind of working together for a common cause. But now it's they're actually developing a friendship. I gotta say, this is one of my favorite female friendships of any Sarah J. Maas book ever. Selena and Lysandra, their friendship, I love it. I'm obsessed with it. And it starts here, and it's beautiful. We basically get Aylin's entire inner monologue about how, the only close female friends that she has ever had is Nehemia and Ansel of Briarcliff. Ansel of Briarcliff poisoned her and tried to betray her and broke her heart. And then Nehemia went and got assassinated. Yeah, she's a little traumatized about making female friends, but for some reason she feels like this is going to be different, and I'm so happy for her. This is a big healing moment, not only just for the girls who've always struggled to have female friends, but for Aelin herself. Aelin does debate telling her like who she actually is, but she decides like now's not the time. But there is something that does excite her about the idea that she knows that whenever she does decide to tell Lysandra who she is and that she's part Fae, that Lysandra isn't going to judge her, but she's going to just embrace her as a friend. And that's kind of a reassuring thought that she has. So anyways, they have all their girl talk and they decide to get back to game planning. And while Aelin's sharing her plans of how she's going to break out Aedion, Lysandra then turns to her and says, "What if we killed 2 birds with 1 stone?" To which Aelin replies, "I'm listening." And I guess you're just gonna have to keep reading to find out what Lysandra told her. Chapter 14, Chaol and Nesryn and Aelin POV later that same exact night. Chaol makes Nesryn promise not to touch Dorian because she is playing like a very on-hands role in the rescue of Aedion, so the rebels are also going to be helping. And he tries to turn to Aelin and get her to make the same promise, to which she responds that, "Has it occurred to you that it might be a mercy to actually end Dorian's life?" And Chaol starts to freak out that she would even suggest it, so she just says, "You know what, like, unless it's absolutely necessary and I have absolutely no choice, I won't hurt Dorian. Like, I'm not going to go out of my way to seek out Dorian and end his life." So Chaol loses his mind again, because this is not what he wants to hear. Like, she thought this was gonna get him to like calm down a little bit, but it just kind of sends him over a little bit more because it's only hours before the mission at this point, and he's starting to have some regrets. He's very on edge. And then Aelin turns to Nesryn, asks her how good she is with a bow and arrow because she always has one on her. And Nesryn says, "I never miss." Aelin decides that she wants to move Nesryn to be a bigger part of the plan, but Chaol is extremely against this. He's like, "No, Nesryn already has her spot." Aelin had some thoughts and plans for her, but I guess Nesryn's going to be where she originally planned to be. Now, if you may be asking, where exactly is this conversation taking place? It's taking place on a rooftop near one of those public executions. Remember, they publicly execute any magic sympathizers in the area. So there's about to be one of those public executions in the city square, and Chaol's leading the rebel movement that tries to disrupt these and rescue as many of the people that are supposed to be executed as possible. Chaol, while he's watching all these people be rounded up right before the attack start, he kind of has this moment where he's like, "You know what? Like, I need my love for Aderlyn to be stronger than my hate for Aelin." And he turns to her and he says, "The clock tower. Take out the clock tower and magic will be free." Chaol does warn her, however, that if she does free magic, particularly tomorrow, I think is what he means here, but there's going to be a whole new massively unpredictable problem, and it's going to affect their plans a ton if she does this. And this actually triggers a thought with Aelin, because the king doesn't necessarily need the tower to be blown down to unleash his magic, because he uses a lot of word magic, aka word marks. And this is when Aelin realizes that she didn't even consider that the king will probably use some word marks to like try to trap her and Aedion in the castle so they can't leave, or to keep her out, because he can use word marks to keep certain creatures from coming in and out. So she's like panicking now. She's like, this is in a couple hours, and what if word marks are a big part of this? She also says, like, I used to study word marks, but like all my word marks books are in the castle and I don't have access to them. To which Chaol reveals, when he was fleeing the castle and he went back to grab Fleetfoot, he also grabbed her books on the word marks. So he says that she can use the word mark books and basically counteract the king's word marks with her own. So down at the square below, the executions begin to start, but then Aelin throws a dagger that hits home on the executioner, and basically causes a bunch of chaos. Nesryn assists with the chaos by throwing a bunch of bows and arrows, and then Chaol and some of the other rebels start going in with their swords and basically attacking the executioners and the guards so that some of the other rebels can make sure that the prisoners go free. And that is just another day in the world of Chaol and his rebels. So there you go. You get a little like behind the scenes. There's like a couple of those that you get to see like throughout the book, but Yeah, there's one of those rescue missions. So after all of that goes down, Aelin goes back to her apartments basically to study the word mark books as much as she can and learn as many word marks as she thinks she'll possibly need for tomorrow, the day that she's freeing Aedion. And she does decide in this moment that Aedion does need to be her focus. So although it's kind of been in talks, she is planning to take down the clock tower, but just not tomorrow. Like, she needs to focus on getting Aedion out of there. Like, that is already going to be something in and of itself, but to also blow up the word tower, like, that's just a whole nother mission, a whole nother complicated scenario that she's going to worry about another day. But unfortunately, that just keeps adding to her list of things that she needs to do in Rifthold before she goes to Terrasen. So she's a little annoyed about that, but she also sees that, like, it needs to happen in order for magic to be free again. Oh, also, before I forget, on her way, like, with the books back to her apartment before she studies them, she does run into some Valg-infested soldiers, and she doesn't, like, kidnap any of them for Erebin, because frankly, she does not have time for that tonight. But we learn two things after she hacks down all of these Valg soldiers. Two things that are good for you to know. One, Valg bleed black. So at this point, we have 3 different colors of blood in the series. If you are Valg infested, you bleed black. If you are a witch, you bleed blue, and if you are a human being, you bleed red. So those are the 3 like blood colors, and that's gonna come up a couple times here and there, but we really like confirm that here after she goes on a Valg killing spree. But Valg bleed black, and then also she learns that once they're beheaded, they don't rise again. She knew she could kill them with fire, but clearly she doesn't have her fire now. But she knows that, like, if you cut off their heads and go all Queen of Hearts on them, you don't need fire. So she'll be okay without her fire magic tomorrow. Chapter 15, Aedion POV, and it is the day of his execution, and he's decided that he is ready to die. The crazy thing is, too, is do you guys remember the Sword of Orinth? This is like the Sword of Terrasen, and it's technically Aelin's by birthright, but the king, for the sake of symbolism, has decided that he is going to execute Aedion with the Sword of Orinth. So he's brought out to be on display during the feast. There's kind of like a stage near where everyone's eating, and he's just gonna sit there on a stool until it's time for him to go. And there's gonna be a bunch of like little entertainment leading up to the main entertainment, which is Aedion's death. Chapter 16, Dorian's POV. And he's sitting in his body, but he has no control over his actions or his words, and he's basically just watching his mother eat next to him. And he has this moment where he realizes that, like, she's just so unaware. Like, she is so detached from her son that she isn't even aware that he's trapped inside of himself and he's not actually himself. And that's honestly kind of heartbreaking. Then we're gonna jump to Aelin's POV, and I don't know what you expected Aelin to do. But for me, I know I wasn't expecting her to come into the castle dressed like a little ballerina dancer covered in body paint, but that is exactly what we get. Aelin's way into the castle is with Madame Florine. Madame Florine was her dance teacher, because back when she was an assassin, Erebin had her take some dance classes just so she can learn like stealth and how to be light on her feet and rhythm and all of that kind of stuff. So it was kind of like supplemental to her assassin training, and she always loved dance. We know that she loves playing piano and that she's really into music, but she also loves dance. Madame Florine was one of her teachers, and so Erebin kind of pulled some favors with Madame Florine to get Aelin in under the disguise as one of the dancers. This also works great because she was able to, with body paint, put word marks all over her body and then covered that again with the same body paint that all the other dancers had. But then also in this moment we find out that not only Madame Florine is she a friend of Erebin's, but she was also a close personal friend of the conductor and many of the players that were killed by the king. Do you remember in Crown of Midnight, after what happened at Eelway, the entire theater decided that they were going to mourn, but the king was in attendance and they wore mourning black, and they played like a mourning song in response to the news of what happened at Eelway, and then the king had the conductor and all of the players removed from the world, as well as the entire theater shut down. And Florine thought that this was a huge crime, and she thinks that the king needs to pay for it. So Florine was offered safe passage for her and her dancers after Aelin begins dropping bodies like they're hot, and people kind of catch on that, with the whole body paint thing, she came in as a dancer, so Florine would be in a lot of trouble. Arobynn basically offered her and all of her dancers a free ticket out of there. So she's walking through the stone castle with the other dancers who are there to dance as entertainment before Aedion. And as they're walking from the stone part of the castle into the glass portion of the castle, she sees word marks on the door, and she needs to get rid of these ASAP. So she decides to cause some commotion and coughing and throwing a fit, and she starts crying, claiming that I think one of the other dancers hurt her on purpose to sabotage her. But she starts crying and being I need water. So one of the guards brings her over a cup of water, and she's taking some sips, and then when the guards look away, she splashes some of the water on the door where the word mark was to kind of wash them away so that it's not gonna trap her and Aedion in. And then she enters the glass castle and the game is on. Chapter 17, Aelin sees a few of the red flowers pinned to the guards. Remember, she told Russ and Brullo to have any of the people who are working with the rebels wear those red flowers, so that way she knows who not to mess with. So she's watching some of the servants as they're bringing in and out the food, as the dancers are kind of waiting for their turn to do the entertaining. And then she spots Nesrin, who's actually in the midst of the servants, disguised as a cook. But then here is something crazy. So they've already gotten in, and Florine basically comes up to Aelin, and she says the craziest thing, and I absolutely love this. So I took a mental note of this and I wrote down the entire quote because I think it's worth remembering. I feel like this says a lot about Florine, but then also who Aelin is as a person and kind of the state of Adarlan. But Florine first walks up to her and says hey, the general's sitting on a stool in the middle of the room and he looks alert and he'll be able to walk on his 2 feet to get out of there. But then she turns to her and she says, "When you shatter the chains of this world and forge the next, remember that art is as vital as food to a kingdom. Without it, a kingdom is nothing and it will be forgotten by time. Wherever you set your throne, no matter how long it takes, I will come to you and I will bring music and dancing." I don't know why I love that so much. I love that so much. Okay, moving on. I felt like that deserved a moment in this episode. So it's not super relevant to what happens next, but I feel like it sets the tone so beautifully. And then she nudges her forward and says, "Give our king the performance he deserves." And trust me, Aelin will. Now we're going to jump to Aedion's POV. He's watching the performances that are building up to the final entertainment, aka him. He notices one of the dancers off to the side. Under all of her body paint, he could see that there's some inconsistencies to the paint, and he realizes that they are a bunch of tattoos. Now, dancers don't have tattoos. This is a career in the dancers of the stage. Tattoos were not a thing. Tattoos were not an option for them. So he's keeping an eye on her, and he watches as she slips kind of away from the crowd, and then she takes what was the skirts of her dancing costume uniform and flips it around to be a hooded cape. And then she starts walking towards the stage. And this is the moment that he sees her eyes. And based off of those Ash River eyes, he knows that this is Aelin Ash River Galathinius coming to rescue him. So the crazy thing is she's walking towards him, but right before she breaks from the crowd to get to him, the dancers, who they were doing this special dance, and they kind of go into this whole thing of what the dance represents, but there's a prop that they all hold, and it's a glass flower, I guess. And at the very end, as they strike the last pose, they all throw their glass flowers to the ground. All of these flowers were full of a reactive powder, so the entire room just fills with smoke, and it is impossible to see anything more than a foot out in front of you. Chapter 18, we are in Aelin's POV. She checked for a collar and was very relieved to see that Aedion is not wearing any type of wardstone anywhere, not as a ring or as a collar, so he's not under any Valg influence. Aelin starts pulling out all of these daggers that she had hidden in her dance costume, and she starts taking out basically any of the guards that get in her way, and she hacks her way through them as she makes her way to her cousin Aedion. She finally makes it all the way to him, grabs him, but then also makes sure to grab the Sword of Ornth, which is her dad's blade. The chaos starts to actually die down from the smoke, so she just starts screaming fire, and then people start panicking again. People are trying to find the source of the fire. People are trying to throw water every which way. So she basically just kind of revitalizes all of the chaos, and her and Aedion try to slip away through the smoke. And although they get through like the main crowd, as she's working her way out of the castle, she basically is going back and forth between like supporting Aedion's weight and trying to drag him out of there, and then having to like set him down to fight like some guards. So she's like going back and forth between the two. She's barely to the final gate when she runs into Dorian. Chapter 19, according to Aelin, she knew off the bat before this guy even opened his mouth, she knew that Dorian was not in there. This is also the moment where she realizes that like she does not have time for this if she's gonna get Aedion and herself out of there alive. And she's begging him for a sign. Like she's saying, give me a sign, Dorian, like give me a sign that you're in there. And he just starts throwing his like Valg infested dark raw power at her left and right, left and right. She's like begging him to show her a sign. And this is kind of the moment where she accepts that Dorian's just like gone for good. Like Dorian's not coming back. And it's a really heartbreaking moment. And while apparently she's been like asking him to show a sign, she, with like the tip of her foot, wrote one of like the word marks specifically for like capturing something in a given space, kind of like what she used in Crown of Midnight on that creature underneath the library in the cells. So sure enough, like he lunges for her and she dives out of the way. He ends up getting stuck in her little word mark trap. She decides that the last thing that she should do is put Dorian out of his misery, because like this isn't Dorian, Dorian's not there, and she's just like, you know what, like it's kind of a crime that his raw magic is being used by his dad as a weapon, and Dorian's might be stuck in there with no control whatsoever, and I should probably just put him out of his misery. So she realizes that on his 20th birthday, she might have to kill her best friend. But then right before she puts Dorian out of his misery, who other than Nesrin shows up, and she has an arrow to Aedion, and she says, I have my orders from Chaol. If you hurt Dorian, I kill Aedion. Apparently, Chaol got a tip from Arobynn that Aelin had the intentions of killing Dorian. Is it really a Throne of Glass book if Arobynn doesn't ruin everything at least once? That, of course, happened, and Aelin's like, you know what? Great. Why don't you deal with Dorian then? I'm going to take my cousin and I'm going to get out of here. And that's exactly what she does. They somehow, some way, they get out of the castle grounds and they run into this carriage that Lysandra's in. And immediately she starts like ripping the dance costume off of Aelin and like scrubbing some of the body paint off of her and putting her in an actual gown. Meanwhile, informing her while Aedion's just like laying on the ground of the carriage, like groaning in pain, that the guards are starting to check carriages because they know that she got out. So they have like a matter of seconds. Aelin finally gets in this like fancy little ball gown, and then they shove Aedion into this little like hidden compartment underneath the bench in the carriage. Seconds after they get him down there, one of the guards stops them, basically inspects the carriage, doesn't know that there's a hidden compartment, so he gives them the thumbs up and they head to Aelin's apartment. Part of the plan was that Chaol was going to meet them there at the apartment, and the second Aelin sees Chaol, she lets loose on him, because not only did he almost compromise the entire mission because of information that Arobynn gave him. Like, when has Arobynn ever been a trustworthy person? But Chaol almost put the entire plan at jeopardy because he decided to listen to Arobynn. And Chaol's like, well, I was right because you were going to do it. And she's like, I don't think you understand. Dorian is not there. Like, Dorian is gone. Like, you need to accept the fact that Dorian is basically dead. And then he has the audacity to be like, don't talk to me like you're my queen, because you're not my queen. So then she comes at him with what we're all thinking. She's like, you need to figure out who you serve then, because putting Dorian on the throne is not an option anymore. And he has nothing to say to this, so she's like, you know what, you go take first watch. So Chaol thankfully goes and leaves, and Lysandra is kind of with Aedion trying to like, you know, find the injuries and see what she can do to help. But then the second Chaol leaves, Aelin like turns to Lysandra. Lysandra looks at her and she goes, why did he call you queen? And Aelin tells her, she lets her know, I'm not Selena, I'm Aelin, Arobynn rescued me, Arobynn knows, I'm trying to get back my kingdom, basically. And, oh, by the way, I'm half Fae. And Lysandra seems a little hurt at first, but then she has this really funny moment where she goes, shame. I thought Aedion was really handsome, but you guys do look a lot alike. And now I can't kiss him because it would basically be like kissing my best friend. And they have a laugh. That's when Aelin realizes that she made a really good decision in befriending Lysandra. Chapter 20, we are in Elide's point of view, and she is working her way up the steps. Poor girl. Like, she's not only is she crippled and has a bad messed up ankle, but she also has chains around her ankles, and Morath is literally just like stairs all the time. Like, there's stairs everywhere, there's so many floors, and she constantly has to go up and down stairs all day. So bless her ever-loving heart. I feel like every single time we're in Elide's POV, the chapter starts with Elide was working her way up or down the stairs. So this is one of those scenarios. So basically she's been having a bunch of nightmares about Manon basically ever since she met her. So she is horrified when another servant hands her a letter that's written to Manon, and he's like, hey, I need you to deliver this to Manon. While she's walking to find Manon, she kind of has this whole inner monologue about how in the world she got to this point in her life where she is this person doing these kinds of tasks, and that kind of serves to give us a little bit of Elide's backstory. Basically, her dad handed her over to her uncle Vernon when she was about 8 years old, and her uncle had locked her in a tower in Parinth when the king's army took over Terrasen. Her uncle basically pledged himself over to the king of Aederlin to be his faithful servant, and then stole her father's title. I believe her parents were then killed by the king of Aederlin for like treason, even though they never served him in his kingdom. They were fighting alongside Terrasen, but that's besides the point. What I really want you to notice there is that she is the true heir of her father's title, not her uncle. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce you to Elide, the true lady of Parinth. And we'll get a little bit more into her backstory later and what that means, that that's her title, but it's something you really want to know. In this inner monologue, she realizes, you know what, for the past 10 plus years, I've been waiting for someone to come rescue me, and no one is, so it's about time I take my rescuing into my own hands. So for the past couple days, she has been working out an escape plan. She has been saving up some money and stealing a little bit here and there, and she's been working in the kitchens basically to find out when the wagon's coming to bring more food for the kitchens, and she's going to try to sneak back on that wagon. Also, she heard about what's happening in the catacombs underground. I guess once Duke asked Manon about the experiment, it got out with the witches, so everyone's been talking about it. So she knows what's going on down there and like the breeding experiment they want to do on the witches, and honestly, she does not want to stick around to find out what's being bred and what is created, or of course if that experiment goes wrong, she does not want to be anywhere close. She finally gets to Manon to deliver the letter and reveals that she can't read because Manon's like, how do I know you didn't read it? But Manon teaches her how to spell her own name and basically says like, okay, like, well, if you get any letters and it has this on it, that's my name, bring it straight to me, like, I don't want to get letters from anyone else. And then Elide starts being like, what? Why me? Manon basically calls her out. She's like, stop acting like you're so timid. Like, I know that you're sneaky. I can tell that you're very cunning. You're a very smart person. Like, stop acting like this dumb little servant girl, because I know you're not. Then starts the interrogation where she asks her which of her parents are related to Vernon. She reveals that her father was Vernon's older brother and her mother was just a low-born laundress from Rosamel, which is basically like northern Terrasen-ish area. Then Elide decides to come back at her with her own questions and asks about the wyverns. Like, why do they exist? Like, wyverns disappeared. After all this time, they're just here, fully grown, and the witches all have one now. And Manon just says that the king made them. Now, Elide says, what do you mean the king made them? You know, you would think this is a very simple question, but Manon realizes she's never stopped to ask this. She's just been glad that she's had Abraxos, and she decides that she doesn't really want to dwell on this and what that might mean, so she just dismisses Elide. But after Elide leaves, Manon realizes that Elide has no clue that she is part witch. And this is also where Manon realizes that she's a witch through her mother, because Vernon isn't witch, so it can't be through her dad's side. So she's like, okay, Northern Terrasen mother was probably half witch. So she finally opens the letter that Elide came all that way and down all those stinking stairs to deliver to her, and it's from the Blackbeak grandmother. Basically says that Duke Parrington told on her for being so difficult, not providing a Blackbeak coven to be bred with these Valg thingies. And then she also informs her that some of the other covens from both the Yellowlegs and the Blue Blood clan are going to be joining them in Morath soon, so she doesn't want to hear about any fights. And we know from Air of Fire that that is highly unlikely, but hey, we're just going to have to stick around and see how it goes. I mean, as if Manon didn't have enough things on her plate to worry about, she also now has to try to diffuse fights left and right between all three feuding covens, and covens that have been feuding for hundreds of years. So she's like, great. This is my problem now. Then while she's like contemplating like how in the world she's going to keep all this from happening, she can't help thinking about Elide's question about what do you mean the king made the wyverns? Because there was another time where similar wording was used to her before. Do you remember when her grandmother made her kill that Crocian witch? One of the last things the Crocian said to her was, "You were made into monsters." So Manon decides that she's gonna go to someone for some information. And this is, I'm probably so pronouncing her name wrong, Ghislaine. I think it's a Ghislaine. She's one of the 13, but she's basically the most scholarly of them all. Like, she's a big reader, she's very knowledgeable, and Manon kind of treats her like a historian, if you will. So Manon goes to meet Ghislaine and basically says, I want to know everything you know about the Valg. So per Ghislaine, this is what we know about the Valg. Valg, Fae, and humans were the only being on the world a millennia ago. The Valg realized that they needed offspring like the Fae and humans did, so they started kidnapping Fae and bred them to create witches. And now this is something that we didn't know before, but the witches that resemble more of Valg are referred to as the Iron Teeth, and the witches that resemble more of Fae are the Crocians. So remember, yeah, the yellow legs and the blue bloods and the black beaks, like those are all Iron Teeth witches, but then there's Crocian witches, and they have been feuding for forever. Like, as long as they've existed, basically. So it's not just like a matter of like, oh, all the witches just one day like split up into two people and they had a civil war among themselves. Like, no, there's basically like, you can be a more Fae-like witch, or you can be more of like a Valg-like witch, which are the ones that kind of have like this more like vampire undertone to them. That's like the Valg in them coming out. So anyways, the humans wanted the witches gone, but the Fae King Brannon of the Wildfire, you guys remember him? He gave them the land called the Wastes, but he and Queen Maeve banished the Valg themselves. So the witches got to stay, the Valg did not. And although the witches are known for their more like wicked nature, Valg, according to legend, are just like the origin of evil. So they didn't believe that the Iron Teeth witches needed to be banished like the Valg did. They felt like it was a little different. Then Ghislaine says what they're both thinking. Basically, the smell here that they're finding on some of the soldiers, Ghislaine thinks that the king found a way to kind of stuff Valg into human bodies. But Manon corrects her and basically says like, well, the Duke says that like the Valg are our allies in this war. And Ghislaine tells her that Valg do not form alliances. It is not in their nature. So Manon tells her what the Duke asked of her, basically saying that he wants to breed Valg with some of the Blackbeak witches. And when Ghislaine asks her what she's gonna do, Manon basically says like she has 2 days to make a decision, but she's gonna write her grandmother to see like what her grandmother thinks and if her grandmother knows anything about this. So the next morning when Manon goes to like their dining common, which is kind of funny because they don't really eat human food, but they all go there and like pretend to eat the human food. But while they're there, everyone's kind of tense because word has gotten around at this point. Like everyone kind of knows that Manon has to make a decision about which coven is going to be forced to breed with the Valg. But when she goes to sit down with the 13, a Yellow Legs coven leader walks up to their table. Now remember, her grandmother said that some people from the other covens were going to be showing up in the next couple days. This is one of those covens. So this Yellow Leg coven comes up to Manon and basically says like, hey, we heard and we want to volunteer our coven. Basically, what the Yellow Legs leader says is that the Blackbeaks have kind of been like chosen by the king, and Manon herself, like his wing leader, is going to always prioritize the Blackbeaks in battle. So she's like, as you guys get the glory in battle, like we need to find glory other ways, and this is a way that we think that we can serve the greater good for the witches. So Manon's like, okay, I guess so. So later that day, Manon goes and she finds the Duke and she's like, all right, here's the Yellow Legs coven. You can use them. They volunteered. And he's like, I don't want Yellow Legs. I want Blackbeaks. So he doesn't just want Iron Teeth. He specifically wants Blackbeaks, but he's not really explaining why. And basically Manon says like, nope, you're getting Yellow Legs. Like if the experiment works, like maybe we can talk a little bit more about it later, but like this is what you're getting. He decides he's going to accept the Yellow Legs for now, but says like in the future, he expects more obedience from her. And as she's walking out, she decides to ask him, like, why is he doing any of this? Like, what's the point of all of this? And this is his response, okay? Word for word. Because this world has too long dwelled in ignorance and archaic tradition, it is time we see what might be improved. Did you hear that? Let me tell you what you heard. Because this world, okay? He didn't say land. He didn't say continent. He said world. Now, the witches are doing all of this because they were told that they could have the waste back. Like, they could have the witch lands back. But the Duke just revealed that the entire plan is to conquer the world, not just the continent, not just Aderlin and Rifthold and some of the neighboring continents. He said specifically the world. So he basically accidentally revealed that they want complete world domination. But then on top of that, do the witches honestly think and believe that the Wastes Kingdom is going to be the one exception? Something to consider. That was a long chapter. Chapter 21, another Dorian POV, and this one absolutely rips out my heart. He could hear a woman asking him to show a sign that he was in there, and he tried, but he couldn't beat the Valg influence. And all he can think about is that he wishes that the woman had killed him and put him out of his misery. Chapter 22, Chaol's POV. Later that night, after his watch is done on the roof, he decides to walk the streets at night, basically thinking about how much he hates Aelin. Really, that's it. When he goes to Nesrin's father's home, where Nesrin is staying, and to his horror, Nesrin tells him that she's kind of siding with Aelin and thinks that Dorian might not actually be there anymore. He is still in denial, and he's telling her, like, no, Dorian's still there, there's still a chance. And she goes, okay, that's a possibility. Sure, okay. But what's our plan B? And we see multiple times where Chaol gets, like, very vulnerable with Nesrin, and we get to see a little bit more of, like, why he's acting the way he is. And he basically reveals that everything he's ever done his entire life is for Dorian. He gave up his family title for Dorian. He did things that were against his values and against what he morally believed was right and wrong for the king, because it meant that one day that Dorian would be on the throne and he could serve Dorian. Everything he has ever done has been for the sake of getting Dorian on the throne. And so the fact that Dorian sacrificed himself, like, Chaol always planned to be the one to sacrifice himself for Dorian, but Dorian sacrificed himself for Chaol. And because of that, he doesn't know how to live with himself with this information. And his entire life mission has been to get Dorian on the throne. So if, like, Dorian's not going to end up being the king, like, what was it all for? Like, what is Chaol's purpose? And then Nesrin says a very wise thing that Chaol definitely needed to hear, but basically says that she has a family here and in the southern continent. And she was not close to Dorian like Chaol was. And maybe Dorian was the straight, quickest, and easiest shot to a better future, but he's not the only way to a better and brighter future. So she's not fighting for Dorian, she is fighting for a better future, and suggests that Chaol starts thinking the same way. So she's basically saying, like, maybe Dorian was the best option. Like, Dorian being king would fix all of our problems. And she's like, but if Dorian can't be king, we need to have a plan B. And the main goal shouldn't be making Dorian king, because kings come and go. But what they need to focus on is setting up Aderlin for a brighter future. And surprisingly, Chaol agrees that they'll stay the course, but they'll plot a new path. Chapter 23, Aedion POV, because he is waking up from quite a long coma-induced nap, basically. And he is in Aelin's apartment, and he looks over to a chair and he sees his cousin Aelin sleeping there. Almost as if, like, you know, she can tell that he woke up. She kind of wakes up and they lock eyes for the first time. And then they have this really emotional, sweet, and tender reunion. Because, guys, they haven't seen each other since, like, she was 8 years old. Like, and they were best friends. They did everything together. They just have this moment where it's like, okay, like, let's catch up, basically. And Aelin tells him every single thing that happened from the moment that they were parted, to the attack to Terrasen, to her falling into the river, to Arobin rescuing her, to everything that happened at the Assassin's Keep, everything that happened at the castle, everything that happened in Wendelin. Like, she tells him everything that has basically happened in her life since they last saw each other. And then he takes a turn too. And I think this was really important because they both did a lot of not great things, and they both even actually spent time serving the king, and they both have a lot of regrets, and they both had some things that they were afraid to tell the other person because they thought they would see them differently. So I think it was really good for them to kind of have this little powwow, if you will. But it ends up being like a really good moment for them and very healing. So they got that over and done with. Basically, they just decide that no matter what it took for them to get there, like, they both needed to survive, and they both did, and they both ended up together in the end, and that's what matters. Okay, so now we're going to do something a little interesting. Sarah J. Maas actually is going to take us back in time to earlier the very same day. You guys remember the vaults, right? Well, apparently Aelin messed up the vault so badly that they just don't exist anymore. So naturally, something very similar popped up in its place almost immediately, and that's called the pits, which is basically exactly what it sounds like. It's a bunch of fighting pits and a tavern, basically, all in one. Aelin and Chaol are there to meet with Erebin because he summoned them there, and sure enough, there are Val guards every stinking where. And Erebin decided to choose this place to meet because he decides that Aelin is going to get him his Valg soldier right this minute. And she is going to stick to her promise. She's like, okay, I need to get Erebin his Valg soldier, and then I need to tear down this stinking tower, and then I need to get the Amulet of Ornith, and then I can finally go to Terrazin. So that little checklist just keeps getting longer and longer. So while she's there meeting with Erebin, Lysandra is actually there with him, and the kind of funny thing is that Erebin still thinks they hate each other, so they kind of like go back, and it's almost like fun for them to pretend to hate each other again, even though they're like low-key best friends and spend a lot of time together now. But Erebin basically turns to Aelin and says, you know, now that my investment in the vault is gone, thanks to her, he wants to invest in something else, and he's deciding he wants to invest in the pits, but the owner of the pits wants him to prove his assets, aka assassin. Sorry, that wasn't funny. Basically, the owner of the pits wants to see one of his assassins fight in the pit, and if he's impressed, then Erebin will be able to make an investment in the vaults. And he decides who better to fight in his name than Aelin, so he lets her know that, like, this is a favor he's calling in, right? But of course, she has to go under an alias because she's not going to go in there and say she's Aelin, you know, around all of these royal guards. So she decides, you know what, like, until I pay off my debt to him, like, sure, I'll play your little party. Like, there's no harm to me done in this. So she goes into the pits, and when asked to provide a name, she says, Ansel of Briarcliff. Guys, remember that. Remember that. You remember Ansel from Assassin's Blade? Yeah, that's the name she gives. So, I mean, it works perfectly because Ansel's referred to multiple times in Assassin's Blade as like red wine colored hair girl or whatever. Aelin dyed her hair red, so it works. Chapter 24, Aelin actually gets to decide who she fights against in the pits. So she points to the guy who is exuding the most Valg energy, if you will. And she's basically like, I'm gonna fight you. So she ends up fighting this guy, and it's a no weapon fight. It's like just pure brutal strength. We kind of jump into Chaol's POV for a second for him to be like, he used to be like horrified of her, like when he watched her fight, but whatever she learned from that Rowan guy in Wendelin, goodness gracious, like he is absolutely in awe of how insanely more intense she fights. And after they make a really big show of it, she has this moment where she has this dude in like a headlock, and then she turns towards Erebin, and he kind of like gives her this nod, and then she just cracks his neck. And that's when Chaol realizes like she was just toying with the Valg soldier the entire time. Like it was literally nothing for her. Like she was just messing around having fun, whereas this guy was putting his heart and soul into that fight. And Erebin is annoyed because she hops out of the pits and goes over to Erebin, and he's like, I wasn't telling you to kill him. I just said, like, you could end the fight. He's like, but I wanted that guy. Like, that was the Valg that I wanted. And she was like, oh, sorry, I guess I'll just have to get you another Valg another time. Because remember, he wants it alive. He doesn't want someone dead. And that Valg soldier is no longer with us. Aelin took care of that dude. So this was kind of her way where he was kind of abusing his power over her, asking her to fight for him, and then she kind of made a power move back, being like, I said I would get you your guy, but I didn't say I'd do it right now and on your terms. Like, I'll get you your guy on my own terms. So she starts to like walk out thinking that she finally got the last word, and then Erebin yells after her and says, don't you want to know where we buried Sam? I hate this man. This man is trash. This man is garbage. We all hate Erebin Hummel. He is, of all the villains in Throne of Glass, he is significantly by far the worst. And she knows that like this is a ploy for him to have another favor out of her, but she decides, you know what, like I don't even care, like I do want to know where Sam is buried. And so he tells her that he dug some small graveyard along the river in the middle of nowhere basically, and then she goes to leave, and like the last thought, and like this isn't important but I included it because I love it, her last thought as she's leaving is how much she hates that she has to leave Lysandra in there with Erebin, but she can't like take Lysandra or like find a way to get Lysandra out of there because Erebin's supposed to think that they hate each other. And like she hates that she's leaving her girl bestie in there with Erebin. And I love that. I love that. Chapter 25, we have another Elide POV. She is eavesdropping in the kitchens, of course, as she does. The wagon that is going to deliver the food for the kitchen, it's coming in like a week. So she's like, yep, that's my way out. So she's doing dishes in the kitchens when Astrid shows up and basically is just like, you wash, I'll dry. And Elide's like, okay. And then Astrid just starts like tearing into her, like interrogating her, asking her questions like her age, her heritage, how old she was when magic disappeared. And then Astrid jumps the gun and literally just tells this girl, like, so are you aware that your mother's like half witch? Okay, I don't believe Manon, when she said to keep an eye on her, said to like share all that information, but okay. And then while Elide's like trying to process, like, is she telling me this? Like, how does she know this? All of that. She asks if the wind has ever called to her. Now, this is a moment where Elide's like, it actually has, but she's not going to tell Astrid that. There's like this thing to witches, like whenever they come of age, that the wind starts like, they kind of have like this special like soul tie with the wind, I guess. And Elide has always felt like the wind was like calling to her, or like communicating to her, and she's always had like this special connection, like whenever there's a breeze, whatever, I don't know. It's really hard to kind of explain, not in Sarah J. Maas's words, but Elide has this moment where she's like, I have felt called by the wind. And she's like trying to process what all this means. I mean, for goodness sake, she's still processing the fact that her mother was like a half witch, and then the fact that she's just always thought that she like liked the breeze now actually means that she might actually be part witch herself. So it's just a lot of information and she's processing. But in her processing, she realizes that that might be the only reason her uncle's kept her around, because that's something she's thought of before. Her uncle doesn't exactly like her or enjoy having her around. But why else would her uncle keep her around than if she's a witch and he's trying to do experiments on witches? And then she has a moment where, like, let's say her uncle doesn't know. All the witches apparently now know that she is part witch. And she's like, how much longer is it going to be before my uncle realizes I'm part witch? And then he forces me to go down to try to breed Val. Like these yellow legs witches that everyone's talking about. Absolutely no thank you, I'm out of here. Elide now realizes that she does not have a week until that food wagon arrives. She needs to find another way out of here. So she decides she's going to sneak back up to Manon's rooms, because when she was up there last time, she was spying for herself to see if Manon had any valuables in there. Sure enough, there was some gold. So Elide goes up to Manon's room and she's trying to steal some of Manon's gold, when sure enough, Astrid predicted that she was going to come to Manon's room, so she was in there waiting for her. Astrid immediately just starts like getting on her tail, basically like, I assumed the worst and I was correct. Like, what are you trying to do? Like, what's your plan? Like, are you a witch or are you not? And as Astrid is trying to confront Elide about all of this, Manon walks into her room and she's like, what is going on here? She's just had a horrible day. She's been breaking up fights between all the covens. She's been dealing with the guilt of submitting those yellow legs to be a part of an experiment. And then on top of that, she knows that the Duke is going to be asking for black beaks most likely later if the experiment works. So then she's already kind of trying to think ahead to that. And then she comes into her room to see that Astrid is chewing out Elide in her room. So she's like, okay, what's going on? So she actually starts chewing out Astrid, and she's like, if I ask you to keep an eye on someone, I'm not asking you to interrogate them and then do whatever this is, whatever's happening right now. So Manon dismisses Astrid and is like, I'm going to talk to Elide myself. So Astrid goes to leave, and Manon basically says like, I don't know why you're trying to steal my gold. You can have it. If you're trying to use it to escape, don't try to bribe anyone because they'll just turn you in. No one here is trustworthy. Try to use your money when you get out of here to find safe place to stay. And then Manon starts to walk Elide back to her rooms to make sure she gets back to her room safely. But sure enough, who do they run into in the hallway other than Elide's Uncle Vernon? He naturally says a bunch of gnarly stuff, not only to Manon, but he just starts ripping into Elide. Probably is more of like a power play to seem stronger in front of Manon, but he like rips into her a little bit, makes fun of her, tears her down, and then he just goes to walk away. And then Manon walks Elide into her room, closes the door, and then Manon turns to her and said, do you bleed red or blue? She basically decides in this moment that she is going to let Elide choose who she is. And then Elide says, my blood runs blue. So Manon welcomes her into the Blackbeak clan. And that just sets off a whole nother plot line that we're going to have to talk about in a later chapter. But for now, that is the end of Queen of Shadows Part 2. Thank you for joining. I will see you next Monday for Part 3.